Welcome back. So now if you see this project and when you open source main Java, you will see one application.java class. So basically this file is created with your project name with application. So if your project name is X, then file name will be X application.java, and this is the file. And this class is basically responsible for everything what you do in your project. It's like runner file. Okay, so in general people will develop any applications, and once they develop application they will deploy it in on any servers. Now there is a server called Tomcat. Okay, so if you develop any Java application, then you generate jar file out of that application and you deploy that jar file in Tomcat server so that you can work on that application by launching in any browser, because you started on one application server, right? So the application is different and hosting server is different. But with Spring Boot has a power that it comes with embedded server. Okay, so Tomcat server is also part of this project. So that means when you run this runner file, automatically that builds your entire project. No matter if you develop any REST services or front end or back end, whatever you develop, it builds your entire project, create jar file for it, and also it starts a Tomcat server on your behalf and deploy this jar files, your application build files on the Tomcat server, and application will be in running mode. Everything will happen with the Spring Boot. Okay, so that's the magic of what Spring Boot gives us. It comes by default with embedded Tomcat server, so that you need not again deploy your project on any other server. Okay, but in general if you want to deploy in any hosting servers, you may do that, but for your local testing you need not have any server. So automatically that comes embedded with your project. Okay, so this is the main runner file I told you, right? So when you run this file, that's where server will get started and all your code will get deployed on that server. So that means you can access your developed application by starting and running this file. Okay, so we can run this class right now and see how the Spring Boot server will get started, so that you will get some idea. But before that, so I need to tell you something. So in pom.xml we have added JPA dependency, right? So I told you that JPA dependency is related to the database operations. So if you want to run this class and start the server, as you have JPA dependency in your POM, it will expect you to also provide information about what database, like are you using SQL database or MySQL, anything, right? But at this time we are not yet there. So either we can comment out this JPA dependency now, we can bring back again once we talk about real databases. So I will simply add this line to comment out for just few lectures, and I will uncomment after finishing of the Hello World project. Okay, this is how you can comment out in your pom.xml file. So these are the symbols. So now these are not detected when you try to run your project. Great. So go to that class again, and now let's start the server and see how that goes. I am now launching the Spring Boot app, where it will first launch Tomcat server and then it will deploy all the files whatever you have developed on that server. Perfect. Now let's read the logs. Okay, it's trying to start the Spring Boot and you can clearly see that Tomcat server started on 8080 port, right? And now your Spring Boot application is sitting on that 8080 port. And now whatever you work on this project, all those can be accessed from 8080 port. Now for example, if you develop any web application, you can see your web application on this port now in your system. right? So it started in your system only. So to access this, you can just do localhost colon 8080 to access this. Let's do it very quick. So I would simply say localhost colon 8080, and then you will see this error right now because we did not start any implementation. Okay, but your Spring Boot server is started, and if you develop any REST API service calls, then you can access it from here. So you can see this message and confirm that initializing servlet dispatch and completed initialization. So that means you are all set and you started your Spring Boot server. Okay, and that's done. And now your next goal is to build and develop REST service calls, and that's about this class. So this is very important. I can say this is a heart for your Spring Boot applications, and this class is identified with this annotation. This is important, at the rate Spring Boot application. Okay, so in general, if you know Spring, then I can explain you how best Spring Boot is and how it solves all the disadvantages of Spring. Okay, so Spring is previous version and Spring Boot is the version with enhanced features and addressing some pain points of Spring, right? But I assume that in this course people do not know Spring also. It's like they are new to the development. So there is no point for me to explain where exactly Spring and Spring Boot is differences are there. Okay, so I don't assume that you already have Spring knowledge. So, but when you move your cursor, you will see there are so many annotations here. Component scan, enable auto configuration, So if you work with the Spring framework, not Spring Boot, then you have to add all these annotations for your class file. So in Spring Boot, they made one annotation called Spring Boot application, under which all these annotations they clubbed. So lecture by lecture, I will explain you what all these annotations are. So one thing I want to explain here is Spring Boot configuration. So basically this annotation, when you run your server, automatically that will check the configurations present in application.properties file. Okay, so here you are nowhere telling that go and find this file to see what all properties you defined and start the server based upon these properties. Okay, you are nowhere mentioning that. So in generally people give here database properties or profiles, so many things we will give here. Based upon that, your Spring Boot will start according to the properties you define. If you don't define any properties, then it starts with their default profile. Okay, but how do your Spring Boot Java class knows where exactly your properties file is present? Okay, so that knowledge is automatically given with the help of this Spring Boot configuration. Okay, so these enable auto configuration, basically these annotations will help you to check this file in source main resources, and it will load all these properties before it starts the server. So based upon the properties it will start, right? So like this, there are some annotations. If you are working with Spring in previous versions, then you should all give this annotations. But the beauty part here is everything is clubbed in one single annotation called Spring Boot application. So if you don't define this annotation, then when you try to run this, then that does not make any sense. Spring Boot cannot identify where to start the server or how to deploy everything. So this is the most important, and with this annotation only one can identify how to start the server from the Java class file. Okay, and there is another folder called source test Java, just like source main Java. All your unit test cases will go inside this. Okay, you have annotation called Spring Boot test here, which I will talk later. So this will help you to get the knowledge about all your application code, where exactly files are present, properties folders are present, everything. The Spring Boot test will come and bootstrap in your project. You need not provide any dependencies imports manually. So move your cursor and you see there are some bootstrapping stuff, extend, all these are plugged in Spring Boot test. So one thing you need to understand, to start your actual dev server, you should have Spring Boot application annotation. and to run all your unit test cases. What are unit test cases? Testing the code is nothing but unit tests. I will again talk deeply on unit test cases when we go into the testing phase, and what are different best practices to write unit test cases, how would we write it, everything will go in detail, and that will be figured out with this Spring Boot test annotation, right? And you have another folder called resources where you place all your properties details like SQL username, password, and different profiles, database details, everything, whatever global properties you need for your project, you will place inside this, and automatically when you start server, that have ability to catch because of this annotation, right? So that's about the folders what we have with the empty project what we got from Spring Initializer. And you know about pom.xml, which I just told you that we have some dependencies directly, right? And the target folder will automatically generate when you run your project. Great. So these are the details. Now with this knowledge, let's go ahead, and in the next lecture, let's have one plan of writing and developing one Hello World REST service, and we'll take it from there. Okay. Thank you.